He stopped texting first, stopped asking about your day, stopped noticing you in the room, yet you kept going, giving more, trying harder, smiling when you wanted to cry, waiting for a reply to a message he read and ignored, waiting for the moment he would finally see you the way you deserve to be seen. And here you are. And I want to tell you something important right now. The first 30 seconds, before you've decided whether to stay or go, everything you did to keep his attention was working against you every single time. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to understand why this happens and change it once and for all. I study the brain. It is my profession, my passion, my life. Neuroscience, cognitive psychology, psycholinguistics. All of this is not an abstraction to me. These are tools for understanding human beings. And when I look at relationships where one person gives everything and the other throws crumbs, I don't see a love drama. I see biology and neurochemistry and predictable patterns that can be changed. Today, I will tell you exactly how the brain of someone giving you those crumbs works and where their weak spot is, and exactly what you need to do not to manipulate or take revenge, but to get back the woman you were before him. Baha, you were him. And what happens to him afterward is just a logical consequence. Stay until the end, because what I say in the final part is what changes everything. Here is what you will get if you watch this video to the end. You will understand why your availability was literally switching off his interest, not metaphorically, neurochemically. You will learn exactly which mechanism in his brain makes him suddenly remember you. When you stop being around, you will gain concrete understanding, not magazine advice, but knowledge of how the human brain works in states of desire and in indifference. And most importantly, you will see the difference between a woman who lives waiting for his crumbs and a woman before whom he stands and begs for attention. This difference is not in beauty, not in age, and not in how right you are. It is a difference in brain state, in your brain, and this state can be changed starting today. Let me say something that is rarely heard in conversations about relationships. The brain is not romantic. The brain is pragmatic. It is always looking for the answer to one question: is it worth the effort? Evolutionarily, this made sense. Our ancestors could not waste resources on what did not yield results. And this principle, the principle of effort and reward, has not gone anywhere. It lives in each of us, including him. When something comes without effort, the brain loses interest in it. It is not cruelty. It is neurobiology. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter that creates the sense of desire, anticipation, and the hunt, is not released when you receive, but during the pursuit in uncertainty, in the state of, what if it works? Robert Sapolsky of Stanford showed this in his research back in the early 2000s. The dopamine system is activated most strongly by unpredictable rewards. That is exactly why casinos are so dangerous. That is why a person who sometimes responds is more alluring than one who is always there. This does not mean you should play games. It means you need to understand that while you are always available, ready, and present, his dopamine system simply fell asleep. And here you are thinking you are doing something wrong, that you need to try harder, that you need to be better. Meanwhile, his brain has simply stopped noticing you, not because you are bad, but because you became predictable. But that changes. And how exactly? Let's talk about what is actually happening in his head. When you are always available. I have worked with questions of brain and consciousness my entire professional life. And one thing that never ceases to amaze me is how unaware we are of our own neural programs. We think we are making decisions. In reality, the brain makes them. And we only come up with explanations afterward. When you are always nearby, always responding first, always ready to adjust, and his brain receives a simple, clear signal. There is no threat. The task is done. The resource is acquired. And the dopamine system relaxes. This is literally what happens on a neurochemical level. Interest drops and attention shifts elsewhere. I know it hurts to hear because you invested yourself, you tried, you thought being good meant being loved, but the brain thinks differently. A man's ego. And this is not sexism. It is an observation confirmed by many studies, is deeply tied to a sense of importance, that his presence matters, that things are different without him, and that he must do something to earn you. When you have to do nothing, you just exist. His ego gets nothing. And this is where it gets interesting, because the ego is not just vanity. It is a value assessment system. And when this system receives no confirmation, it starts looking for it elsewhere. That is exactly why he suddenly became attentive when he felt you were about to leave. That is exactly why crumbs turned into something resembling care for just as long as it took for you to relax again. This is called intermittent reinforcement, and it creates an addiction not for him, but for you. You waited for the next crumb. You built whole theories around it, convinced that he would change. You justified him, defended him to your friends, found explanations, while his brain was simply doing what it evolved to do. Taking what is given without effort. But wait, because this is only the first part of the story, and it is not the most important. Let's talk about you, about what happens inside you while you wait, because that is where the real key lies. Not in his behavior, but in your brain. When you are in a state of waiting for a text, for attention, for confirmation that you matter, your brain is under chronic stress. Stress cortisol rises, and not periodically, but constantly, because for the brain, uncertainty is worse than a definitely bad outcome. The brain prefers to know that things are bad than to know nothing at all. Research shows, and this is important, that the state of chronic waiting and social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex, the same structure. When he doesn't respond, you are literally in pain. This is not an exaggeration. This is tomography. And here is what happens next. And this is the part that almost nobody talks about. In a state of chronic cortisol, you stop being yourself. Literally, cortisol suppresses the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for awareness, planning, making reasoned decisions, and who you are as a person. You become reactive, impulsive. You do things you don't even understand yourself. You send texts you later regret. You agree to things that don't suit you. You find excuses where there are none. This is not weakness. This is the biochemistry of stress. But there is something even more important. In this state, you start projecting needy energy. And he senses this, not with his mind, but with his gut. The mirror neuron system, which allows us to resonate with another person's state and read their intentions and emotions, is always working. When you are near a person whose brain is screaming, "I need your approval," your brain reads this and reacts. You know how? By pulling away. This is not cruelty on his part. It is an automatic nervous system response to a signal of dependence. We instinctively pull away from someone who needs us too much because it is perceived as a threat to autonomy, us. And so the circle closes. You need him. He pulls away. He pulls away. You need him more. You need him more, he pulls away deeper. You thought the problem was that you weren't good enough, that you needed to be better, prettier, smarter, more convenient, but the problem was the state of your nervous system. And here, this is exactly where everything changes, because the state of your nervous system can be changed. And when you do this, everything changes around you, including his behavior. But first, let me tell you about what I call the switch point, that moment when the dynamic turns in the opposite direction. This is what happens when a woman stops being needy. I'm not talking about pretending, not about ignoring him as revenge or acting cold as a strategy. I'm talking about something much more real and much more powerful. I'm talking about the moment when a woman truly returns to herself, when she starts living, not waiting, when her morning revolves around her desires, not his silence, when she does what interests her, meets those who fulfill her, and thinks about her own future, not his intentions. At this moment, a neurobiological shift occurs. Cortisol drops, and dopamine begins to be released from her own life. Oxytocin comes from real connections with friends, with work, and with herself. Her nervous system exits anxiety mode. The prefrontal cortex takes control again. She becomes herself again, the person she was before him. And here's what happens to him at that moment. His brain, that same brain that existed so comfortably, knowing you were always there, suddenly receives a different signal. The signal is gone. You are gone. The familiar pattern is gone. The amygdala, the brain structure that processes anxiety and loss, is activated. Neuroimaging studies, including those by Helen Fisher's team at Rutgers University, show that when a person loses an attachment object, the same areas of the brain activate as during physical pain and drug cravings, literally the same areas. And he starts thinking about you, not because he has become a better person, but because his brain registered a loss and reacted. The scarcity effect. When what was taken for granted suddenly becomes unavailable, its perceived value rises. This isn't romance. It's basic brain economics. But wait, because this is where most women make a big mistake. He writes or calls or shows up with explanations, and she, who just started returning to herself, falls back because it's what she waited so long for. And everything starts all over again because his brain realized he could return without effort, which means there is no longer a need to change. That's why the real switch point isn't his return. It's your inner state at the moment of his return. If you have truly returned to yourself, you're already different. You can listen to him, you can consider the possibility, but you don't fall because you no longer need him the way you used to. You are whole again. And that is what he did not expect. This is exactly what changes the rules of the game. Let me describe the difference to you specifically in neurobiological terms. There are two states of the nervous system: the sympathetic mode of anxiety, fight or flight, and the parasympathetic mode of safety, openness, and presence. When a woman is in chronic sympathetic arousal, in a state of waiting, anxiety, or need, she radiates this with her entire body. The posture is different, the gaze is different, the voice is different, the pace of speech is different. This is not something she makes up, this is physiology. When a woman shifts into a parasympathetic mode, into a state of inner safety and fullness of presence in her life, it is also instantly picked up. Mirror neurons react to her nervous system before she has even said a word. This is what people call magnetism. No mysticism involved. Pure neurobiology. The woman who is desired is the one in whom an inner structure is felt. The one who has her own life, which she is interested in living. The one who doesn't explain why she didn't answer right away. The one who asks questions out of genuine interest, not out of anxiety. The one whose silence is not anxious, but filled with meaning. His brain reads this as a valuable resource, hard to access, worth the effort. And his dopamine system, the very one that fell asleep when you were always around, wakes up. I have seen this many times in working with people, in conversations, and in the stories they tell me. A woman turns inward for real, not as a strategy, but because she finally decides to live her own life. And after some time, he appears, writes, or calls, sometimes in a month, sometimes in 6 months, sometimes faster because his brain registered a loss and continues to register it. But here's what is important to understand. This is not a goal to make him return. That is a side effect. The main result is you, the person you become when you stop living in wait for his attention. And this version of you is much more interesting than any return of his. Let's talk specifically, not abstractly, because returning to yourself sounds beautiful. But what does that mean in practice? First, get out of waiting mode. This is physical. Right now, if you are looking at your phone every 15 minutes, it is a signal to your brain, I am in a state of anxiety. Anxiety sustains cortisol. Cortisol suppresses the prefrontal cortex. And you continue to be reactive rather than yourself. Put the phone away. This is a simple action, not a strategy or a game. It is the literal beginning of reprogramming your nervous system. Second, dopamine in your own life. The brain cannot exist for long without dopamine. If the only source of dopamine is him, you are addicted. You don't choose addiction. It simply pulls you to where the pleasure was. You need another source. What is something that you are truly interested in? Something where you get results from your efforts, reading, moving, a project, a conversation with someone who really sees you. When your brain starts getting dopamine from your own life, the addiction to his crumbs weakens. Not because you are trying to weaken it, but because your brain no longer needs that specific source as much. Third, oxytocin from real connections. Oxytocin is the hormone of attachment, trust, and intimacy. It is produced in contact with those who truly see you, with friends, with those you can speak to, honestly, with those who are around, not because they need something, but because they enjoy being with you. Many women who were in relationships with a breadcrumb giver gradually became isolated because all their attention and energy were going there. Returning to real connections is returning to oxytocin, and this changes the background of everything. Fourth, restoring your identity. Here's a question I want you to ask yourself right now. What did you love doing before him? What were you interested in? What were you putting off because there was no time, energy, or meaning? This is not nostalgia. It is a map for returning to yourself. When a woman returns to what she is truly interested in, she changes. Her neuroarchitecture literally changes. New connections are built, and an identity is strengthened that does not depend on his gaze. And here, right here, something interesting starts to happen on the outside. I promise to tell you something that changes everything, and now is the time. Here is what I observe in how the brain works, how the attachment system functions, and how human relationships unfold. The person who gave you crumbs was himself in a certain state, the state of a person who did not need to put in any effort, a state that did not require him to grow, change, or be present. When you truly leave that role of the one waiting, needing, and adapting, you remove something from his life that he had gotten used to. Comfort without effort. And his brain encounters something it didn't encounter while you were around, the consequences. Now listen carefully, because this is the most important part. His potential return or possible request for attention is not a victory over him. It is a signal that his nervous system has registered a significant loss. It is information. It is not a guarantee that he has changed. It is only the beginning. And what you do with this information depends entirely on you. If you have truly returned to yourself, you will ask the right questions. You will not fall back into it because of a single message. You look at his actions, not his words, or what he does over time, not what he says on day one. Because words are not yet neuroplasticity. Real changes in behavior are a different story, and they take time. You deserve a person who puts in the effort, not because they are afraid of losing you, but because they realize you are valuable. These are different things. The first is a fear reaction. The second is a choice. And here is the key question you need to ask yourself. Do you want him to be around because he is afraid to lose you, or because he chooses you? That is the only question. It changes everything, because the answer to it determines exactly what you expect from your next conversation with him and your next relationship. If not with him, then with someone else. I want to end this conversation not with advice, but with an observation. Over years of studying the human brain, consciousness, and behavior, I come across one fact again and again. The brain is incredibly plastic. It changes, it rewires, it learns. This means you change every day, with every choice, every time you decide to live your own life instead of waiting for his approval. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to actively form new connections throughout life. This is not a metaphor or self-help from a magazine. It is a fact confirmed by thousands of neuroimaging studies. The brains of Eleanor Maguires, London taxi drivers, musicians, and meditating monks. All of this is proof of one thing. The brain changes in response to what you do, what you focus on, and who you decide to be. A woman who stops waiting for crumbs, not because she read an instruction manual, but because she realized she deserves more, rewires her brain and literally changes her neural patterns. She builds a new identity. And here is what happens to those who are used to giving her crumbs. They either grow because her change creates an environment that demands growth, or they leave because they need someone who will wait. And in both cases, you win, because you are no longer the one who waits. Take that one action today, not tomorrow, not when you're in the right mood today. What have you been putting off? What are you actually interested in? What did you stop doing while all your attention was focused on him? Do it. One small action toward your own life, and watch what starts to happen. If this conversation touched you, share it with someone who needs it right now. You know who I'm talking about. Write in the comments exactly what you are going to do today. It is important for me to know, because the brain changes faster when there is a witness to your intention. That is also neurobiology. Until next time.